The $7 trillion grid. Why America's power system is a coordinated attack waiting to happen. The lights died mid-surgery, monitors flatlined, then rebooted to black. On a trading floor, 100 screens froze, prices stuck like insects in amber. Air traffic controllers told pilots to hold because radar feeds blinked like a bad dream. Meanwhile, across a state line, a second pair of headlights idled behind a chain-link fence. Wire cutters snipped a fiber conduit, a voice on a radio. It isn't weather, go. Hospitals, food, finance, everything paused on one fragile assumption: the grid would keep humming. What we call the grid acts like one machine. It is. It's three hearts barely stitched together. To see the trap, we need the map. Map of the three hearts: Eastern, Western, Texas. Start with the illusion. From Maine to Miami to Chicago, you flip a switch and expect the same invisible rhythm. 60 cycles a second. In the Eastern interconnection, by far the largest, millions of machines agree to that tempo down to thousandths of a hertz. Coal units older than their operators, nukes with the patience of mountains, gas turbines that spin up like sprinters, and an ocean of wind and solar all lean on a single shared heartbeat. If one stumbles, the others feel the tug instantly. That's the blessing and the curse, a shared fate at one frequency. Slide west. The Western interconnection stretches over emptiness, sagebrush, desert, long spans of steel marching between far-flung cities. Physics gets harder here. Those long lines act like taut guitar strings. Pluck them wrong, the note wobbles. Operators run with thinner stability margins because distances amplify every twitch. You can move a lot of power across mountain ranges, but the wire's reactance punishes mistakes. A storm in the Columbia Gorge can press Las Vegas a little off balance. The West lives with that every day. Then there's Texas, ERCOT isolated by design. The state built a border out of physics to dodge federal jurisdiction. It's mostly true, ERCOT stays in its lane. The upside is speed. Decisions travel from dispatchers to generators without out-of-state politics in the loop. The downside shows up when the weather bites or plants stumble and help can't arrive fast enough. There are ties to the rest of the continent, but they're DC valves, small on purpose, measured in crumbs compared to need. Those DC ties matter. They convert alternating current to direct, push it across the seam, and rebuild AC on the other side. That conversion buys control. You can meter how much stress crosses a boundary, but it also caps the lifeline. In an emergency, those valves are eyedropper tubes feeding a patient who needs a transfusion. People think the grid has a pilot. It doesn't. It has a council of pilots with different manuals. Inside the Eastern Heart, independent system operators run markets and dispatch: PJM, MISO, NYSO, ISONY, each with its own rules. Vertically integrated utilities still exist, planning wires based on local rate cases. State regulators weigh today's bills more heavily than tomorrow's resilience. Federal regulators oversee reliability standards, but they don't build steel. The result is a patchwork that mostly works until it doesn't. In the West, WECC coordinates reliability, but controls splinters into balancing authorities from the Pacific Northwest to the desert Southwest. Hydro operators ice snowpack, solar developers chase interconnection queues, wildfire seasons redraw risk maps. Keeping frequency steady is a daily choreography with longer, sparser limbs. It's a different kind of stress than the East, but just as unforgiving. ERCOT is its own balancing authority and market. It can act quickly, but it must also stand alone. When cold seizes wellheads or heat loads soar past forecast, every margin inside the fence matters. The market's price spikes are meant to shout, build more, winterize, show up. But price signals don't thaw valves or fabricate transformers on demand. Here's the quiet irony. The three hearts pretend to be one organism for commerce, power trades, hedges, futures, but in physics they break into islands. The lines between them are bottlenecks by design. A handful of high-voltage DC links along the seams, a few scratching into Texas, and that's it. Any talk of a national supergrid runs into a thicket. Permits across dozens of counties, lawsuits, landowner opposition, environmental reviews, and utility turf wars. Meanwhile, load grows, renewables surge, and the machine's choreography gets more complex. Who actually holds the throttle if something big shakes? Operators in control rooms, eyes on frequency, spinning reserve and contingency lists. They don't debate ideology. They count megawatts and milliseconds, but they work inside the map as it exists. Eastern, Western, ERCOT, inside each, a web of owners and rules. When a line trips in Ohio, a dispatcher in New Jersey feels it in their alarms. When a generator in Arizona sneezes, a Californian battery flinches. When Texas stumbles, the rest can watch and send only a trickle. So three hearts, the East with mass and complexity, the West with distance and tightrope margins, Texas with speed and isolation. Weak stitches between them, that's not an abstract chart, it's the stage where every future crisis will play out. And if the stage is brittle, the props on it, substations, transformers, the iron we rely on, are even more fragile. The hidden choke points, substations and transformers. To see where the machine breaks, you have to stand inside a substation at dawn. Steel lattice, humming buswork, ceramic insulators tall as a person, and at the center, a tank the size of a railcar holding a copper heart in oil. That's the extra high voltage transformer, the device that quietly makes continental trade possible. It takes power at 500 or 345 kilovolts and steps it down to 230, 138, 115, to the levels other lines and cities can drink. Lose one and the map reroutes. Lose a few in the wrong pattern and the dance falters. These aren't off-the-shelf boxes. Each extra high-voltage transformer is custom wound to a substation's quirks, impedance, tap ranges, cooling banks, bushings, and spatial constraints only locals know. Even two that look identical on a drawing may carry different guts. They weigh hundreds of tons. You don't fly them in. You crawl them on special trailers at midnight, bridges checked, permits stamped, police escorts blocking intersections. Every mile is a negotiation. People like to say, we have spares. Sometimes that's true. Often it's a myth that feels comforting. A spare rated at 345 138 kV with one impedance won't necessarily sit where another needs to go. Tap changes won't match. Bushings won't line up with rigid bus. Control cabinets speak different wiring dialects. And if the spare is across the region, you still face the slow motion problem. Weeks to lift, haul, and set, then days to test, dry out, fill with oil, and commission. During that time, the network's stress redistributes across the remaining iron. Substations are the hubs where mechanical physics meets digital control. Power through bus bars, breakers, and isolators, decisions through relays, cabinets, and fiber. You can protect lines with relays calibrated to microseconds, but the trip logic still drives a very physical act. A breaker opens to save itself, and in doing so, pushes current onto the survivors. This is where topology matters. Some yards are built with true redundancy, breaker and a half or ring bus designs that keep multiple paths alive through a fault. Others are simpler, straight buses where one failure slices a swath of capacity. The difference shows up in how far the pain travels. Manufacturing capacity is another quiet choke. The US makes some transformers, repairs others, and imports many. Core steel relies on a niche product, grain-oriented electrical steel, that only a few mills can roll well. Skilled winders and test engineers are not easy to hire. Lead times stretch from months to years, then from years to, we'll tell you when the steel arrives. Utilities place orders and hold their breath. Meanwhile, load grows, storms get meaner, and old units age out with cracked paper insulation and dissolved gases whispering early failure. Known critical sites exist. They aren't labeled on highway signs, but within utility maps, certain transformer banks and substations are tagged as Tier 1 for a reason. They serve refineries, data centers, water treatment, metro cores. You can see their importance by how many lines converge and how few alternate routes exist. In public, these locations are handled quietly, no need to advertise the spine. But attackers with patience can read environmental filings, satellite imagery, and land records. The machines aren't hiding under mountains, they stand behind fences in the wind. Fiber and copper make these places legible to control rooms. Conduits run under gravel, up steel, into relay houses where climate control keeps electronics just right. Cut the wrong bundle, and a dispatcher's screen goes blind. Hit the control house, and breakers may default to safe, often open states that remove power to avoid fires. That's a feature for crew safety, a liability in a coordinated hit. You don't need Hollywood-grade explosives to cause trouble. A few rifles, a map, a timing window, and knowledge of which radiators bleed oil quickest can sideline a bank for months. Even without malice, the bottlenecks bite. A lightning-induced fault that welds a breaker shut can force an emergency reconfiguration that overloads a sister transformer just as heat drives demand. Protective relays trip to save copper, and the substation's topology becomes your fate. Operators can call for emergency ratings, squeeze a little more through with extra cooling or shed load. But those are short bridges. Once a winding cooks, you're not talking hours, you're talking seasons. Spares programs exist, regional pools, shared frameworks, standardized footprints, they help. But standardization runs into legacy. A 1978 yard retrofit doesn't care about a 2025 footprint. Pads don't align, clearances differ. Rebuilding a bay to accept a standard spare takes time you won't have mid-crisis, and storing spares isn't free. Oil ages, seals dry, space costs money, and maintaining readiness competes with rate cases that prize near-term savings. There's a human factor too. The substation tech who hears a transformer sing wrong can call a test that catches an incipient fault. The crew that knows which knife switch sticks in winter can shave minutes off a manual transfer. Those minutes matter when the grid walks a frequency tightrope and every amp has a destination. Lose that knowledge to retirements and the metal feels heavier. So when we talk about fragility, it isn't abstract fear. It's a map of specific yards, specific banks, and the logistics of moving 100-ton organs through towns that don't know their names. It's a supply chain that can't sprint and designs that assume the next piece will be available when needed. The grid's strength is a network. Its weakness is that some nodes carry far more than their share, and replacing them is slow, expensive, and public. That's the choke, hidden until the day it is. The 1950s machine with 2000's nerves, SCADA, and control. Walk from the transformer yard into the control house and the era changes. Outside is iron and oil. Inside is screens, firmware, and passwords on sticky notes. The grid's nerves are SCADA and EMS, systems designed to watch and steer, not to fight. They were built for reliability in a cooperative world, where devices told the truth and links stayed up. That assumption held until the network took everything online. Remote terminal units, the field's eyes and hands, sit in cabinets behind chainlink and dust. They read breaker positions, voltages, currents, gas pressures, oil temperatures. They also accept commands, open, close, raise, lower. Many speak in dialects older than most operators, Modbus DNP3, IEC 60875-104. Those protocols were designed when speed beat secrecy. Clear text carried the day. Encryption wasn't common because bandwidth was scarce and hardware was modest. Nobody thought someone would sit on the line and whisper lies into the machine. At the top of that data funnel is the EMS, state estimators crunching snapshots every few seconds, contingency analyzers simulating N1 events, AGC nudging generators to keep frequency steady. It's good at picture making, a living map of flows and limits. It's less good when the picture flickers. Cut the fiber to a substation and the EMS has to guess. Lose a PMU stream and your millisecond eyes go blind. Operators lean on alarms to filter the chaos, but the alarms stack. One fault spawns 20 children and warning colors wash over screens until red feels normal. Vendor patch cycles run on their own calendar. A manufacturer releases a fix for a relay vulnerability once a quarter. A utility gets a maintenance window once or twice a year. In between, there are change freezes for summer peaks and winter storms. Crews won't risk bricking a device when the load curve climbs, so the patch waits and the exposed window stays open. Multiply that across thousands of relays, RTUs, and servers, and you get a permanent backlog, security debt that never zeros. Meanwhile, human factors cut deeper than any zero-day. Operators sit through 12-hour nights watching green turn yellow and back. The system trains them to ignore chatter, false positives, nuisance alarms. Alarm floods create a reflex, silence, acknowledge, move on. In the rare moment when a flood is real, minutes disappear while they sort signal from noise. That's not laziness, it's survival in a room designed to bark more than it bites. After enough bark, even the bite feels like bark. Air gaps used to be the sacred rule, keep the control network off the internet. In practice, air gaps became air myths. You need vendor support for a relay firmware issue. Here's a laptop, here's a jump host, here's a VPN tunnel with a tight time window. A contractor updates a historian with a thumb drive that touched an office PC. A firewall rule stays permissive after an outage drill because nobody wants to break visibility again. The diagram says segmented. The reality says convenience wins on busy days. Flat networks are cheap to build and easy to manage. Segmenting down to the bay level takes planning, labels, cabinet space, and time with wire maps that aren't always current. So traffic roams more freely than it should. A compromise in a corporate domain shouldn't reach an RTU, but it can if the jump box straddles both worlds and credentials cascade. Zero trust sounds clean. In a 1990s substation with a 1970s relay, it looks like adapters and stopgaps and a to-do list pushed to next quarter. Even without attackers, bugs and misconfigurations act like adversaries. A misset relay curve steals margin. A wrong CT ratio makes a line look cooler than it is. A failed GPS clock drifts phaser measurements and poisons state estimation. These are digital errors with mechanical consequences. A breaker opens, a generator trips, a line sags into emergency rating. The feedback loop is unforgiving. What the software believes becomes what the metal does. And yet these systems keep the machine upright most days. Operators use SCADA like an instrument panel on a plane with patched wings. They know which tags are flaky, which radio links bounce in bad weather, which substation goes quiet when the microwave repeater fogs up. They build mental models of trust. This measurement is real. That one needs a call. This particular transformer alarm is late after a reboot. That human layer papers over design, gaps the way duct tape holds a glove box shut. Vendors are pushing modern segmentation, signed firmware, and anomaly detection tuned to power systems, not office networks. Utilities are testing out-of-band sensors that don't trust SCADA alone, traveling wave fault locators, distributed PMUs, digital twins that scream when the model and the field diverge. Some regions are moving to role-based access everywhere and multi-factor on jump hosts. It's progress, but it arrives into fleets with 3 software generations living side by side. Here's the critical point. Digital weaknesses matter, but physics still calls the shots. You can blind a control room and confuse an operator, yet a hotline still sags, a cold generator still hesitates, and a relay still trips at its threshold. SCADA errors can hasten a fall or hide it, not rewrite gravity. When the grid slips, electrons don't wait for a software patch. The next minutes belong to inertia, frequency, and protection, rules written in copper, steel, and time. Physics does negotiate how cascades start. When screens go blind and radios hiss, the grid doesn't wait for clarity. It settles arguments with frequency. Every motor, generator, and inverter leans on that 60 Hz beat. If load nibbles higher than generation, frequency starts to fall. If generation exceeds load, it climbs. That tiny drift is the first language of trouble, and operators read it in tenths of a hertz while their tools catch up. Old machines help. A coal or gas turbine with a heavy rotor carries inertia, stored energy in a spinning mass. When a plant trips, that rotor doesn't stop instantly. It gives up a gulp of energy to slow the frequency slide, buying seconds. Those seconds are everything. They let governors open valves, let automatic generation control nudge other units, let demand response kick in. But as grids retire synchronous machines and add inverter-fed resources, that free buffer thins. Inverter-based resources can respond fast, but only if they're set to form or support the grid and have headroom. Too often, they're already at the edge. Planning assumes N1, one thing can fail and the system will hold. That's not superstition. It's baked into studies and relay settings. But the world serves NK. A line trips into a tree, a plant stumbles, a gas compressor loses power upstream, and the second loss lands while operators handle the first. Now you're stacking events faster than your playbook. The difference between N1 and N2 isn't just one more failure. It's a phase change in how the grid behaves. Heat makes wires droop. A heavily loaded 500 kV line runs hot, sags inches closer to trees, and its ampacity brushes a limit. Protective relays sit like lifeguards, watching current and voltage angles. If a line exceeds its thermal rating or sees the wrong oscillation, a relay trips a breaker to save the equipment. That act is protective and merciless. The moment it opens, the power reroutes. The survivors pick up the slack, currents jump, and another relay stares at a number it doesn't like. Hidden failures lurk in those relays. A misset zone, a wrong CT ratio, a firmware quirk that misreads a transient, none matter for years, until the day when the operating point pushes into a corner case. Then a relay that should hold for a few cycles trips in one, a backup that should wait steps in early. These aren't cinematic betrayals. They're quiet parameter errors that make the cascade steeper than it should be. Meanwhile, governors and controls are doing math. Turbine governors see frequency dip and try to push more power. If there's fuel and headroom, they help. If there's not, they saturate and stop helping. Wind and solar in grid-following mode ride the voltage and phase that's given. When those wobble beyond their ride-through curves, some decide to protect themselves and disconnect. Others, better tuned, hold on, but only if they were told to. Batteries can throw power in milliseconds, but only up to the limits, and only if someone reserved state of charge for support. Markets don't naturally pay for empty batteries, operators have to. Oscillations start as tiny power angle swings between regions. Think of two groups of machines pulling on a rope. If the angle between them grows, power flows harder to pull them back in sync. If damping is light because inertia is low and controls are sharp, the swing can grow, not shrink. Wide area damping controllers and remedial action schemes exist to catch this. Trip a plant here, drop load there, insert a series cap, but they rely on clean signals and tight coordination. Cut a fiber and the scheme misses its cue. Voltage collapses don't always announce themselves with frequency. A sudden reactive power deficit caused by a long line, a major motor load, or generator voltage regulator saturating pulls voltages down. Lower voltage means higher current for the same power, which means more voltage drop on lines, which means lower voltage still. Switch in capacitors, tap up transformers, bring on SDATCOMs and synchronous condensers if they're nearby. If they aren't, a region can slip into a place where no small action fixes it. Lines trip on undervoltage, transformers heat, loads stall, and blackout unfolds without a dramatic frequency plunge. As islands form, automatic or accidental, their fate depends on local balance. A city that loses its tie to the rest of the interconnection and keeps more load than generation will see frequency droop into the 58s. Under-frequency relays start shedding load in blocks, 59.3, 59, 58.7, each step trying to stop the slide. If it works, the island stabilizes at an ugly but survivable beat. If it doesn't, generators trip on protective limits and the lights go out clean. Black starts begin when the last hum dies. Black start is choreography in the dark. Not every plant can do it. You need a unit that can wake up without the grid, diesel to spin a shaft, a hydro gate, or a battery big enough to fake a grid. You energize a bus, bring on auxiliaries, raise voltage and frequency into a target window, and then carefully add load in bites. Add too much cold load pickup, air conditioners and motors pulling locktrotor current, and you trip back to black. Add another generator with the wrong phase, you fight each other and trip. The path back is measured in hours and days, not minutes, and every step is bounded by the physics that caused the fall. Micro story: the night the east went dim. He heard one tone first, a clean ping that usually meant a line reclosed fine, then another, then a wash of them, too many, crowding his headset. In the control room, the wall map smeared with red flags as if someone dragged a brush across Ohio. A senior operator leaned forward, elbows on the console. "Verify status," she said, too calm. On camera, a 500 kV span arced pale blue, where the conductor had sagged into a crown of trees that hadn't been trimmed enough that summer. The relay did its job. The first breaker opened. Frequency dipped a hair. Nobody panicked at 59.9. A dispatcher issued redispatch calls, nudging gas units up a few megawatts. Then a second line, parallel and already warm, took the load it didn't want. Its relay saw a curve it didn't like and tripped. The tones turned into a chorus. The state estimator lagged a few seconds behind reality, recalculating a grid that wouldn't sit still. On a neighboring screen, voltage contours inched from green to yellow. "Implement shedding block 1, the senior said, voice now tight. The order moved through a script. Somewhere, lights flickered in a strip mall that had stayed open late. Air handlers coughed back to life. Cold load pickup bit harder than the model expected. The frequency slide steepened to 59.4. Across the seam, a neighboring ISO thought it was a local hiccup. Their alarms suggested a corridor issue, not a wide area event. They held their reserves. That's how these things grow, each room trusting its picture more than the room next door. Under-frequency relays started peeling load anyway, automatic and numb, at thresholds set years earlier, 59.359. In a brick row house, a kid asked why the fridge hummed like it was tired. In a hospital, a nurse opened a drawer and touched the backup flashlight that wasn't where she left it. 2 hours later, the city breathed by candlelight, subway gates dark, sirens loud in streets suddenly wider. In the control room, the tones finally stopped. Silence felt wrong. That night was an accident, trees, settings, timing. Intent would be more precise. Coordinated attack playbook. Simple, cheap, devastating. Start with a team you wouldn't notice. 2 people in a dusty pickup roll past a rural fence line twice a week for a month. They learn the shift change by the taillights, note when the patrol slows and count the camera sweeps. They don't need badges. They need a cheap quadcopter, bolt cutters, a few magazines, and a hand-drawn list of gear inside the fence. The control house, the fiber entry conduit, the radiator banks that bleed a transformer when punctured low. The target list isn't mysterious. Extra high voltage transformers that feed metro cores, control houses where relay panels accept commands, fiber trunks that carry SCADA and synchrofaser data back to dispatch. They choose yards with straight bus topologies where a single breaker failure takes out a bay, and yards with old fences that meet OSHA more than deterrence. They mark which banks share a spare and which don't. They look for radiator arrays within easy rifle distance of a field that nobody watches at 2 a.m. Timing is the force multiplier. Choose a night when weather already trims margin, heat that droops lines, or cold that thickens gas and slows combustion. Pick the hour a system transitions between shifts, when the radio chatter turns to handoffs and eyes move from screens to forms. If they want to be quiet, they start with the fiber. A shovel and a locator app are enough to find the line trench where it hugs the property edge. Cut the wrong bundle, and the yard goes dark to the control room. Operators see the tag, loss of communications, and mark it. In isolation, it's a nuisance. In a coordinated hit, it's the blindfold. The rifle work isn't fancy. Transformers are armored against mistakes, not against intent. Aim at the bottom of a radiator bank or the header, and hot oil drains like a wound. The bank trips on low oil or on sudden pressure if the shot rattles a baffle. A control house window isn't strong. A few rounds into breaker cabinets can jam mechanisms or shatter auxiliary power supplies. They aren't trying to blow a yard sky high, they're trying to turn it off long enough that it matters elsewhere. Meanwhile, a second team across a state line repeats the pattern. Their target feeds a gas compressor station that keeps fuel moving to generators. Take the station's power, the compressor's idle, and gas pressure droops a few hours later. The generation you counted on to backfill the first hit underperforms. That lag is the point. Staggered physical hits create delayed cascades that land as operators are still triaging the first loss. Blend-in tactics help them disappear. Rural trailheads at dawn, vests that say fiber locate bought online, a white utility bucket parked for 10 minutes near a roadside cabinet. They avoid urban sites with armed guards and chase the forgotten corners where a single road gate is the security plan. If they're careful, they never cross the fence. They don't need to. The digital assist is blunt. While teams cut fiber, a wiper malware strains toward operator desktops and historian servers at the utilities control center. It's not Stuxnet, it's a distraction. Wipe the HMI screens or crash the engineering workstations at 2:14 a.m. and the first phone calls go to it. Alarm floods now look like software trouble. Restoration scripts hide in shared drives that suddenly read empty. People lose minutes, resetting sessions and rebooting as the physical picture changes. Cheap drones add eyes where cameras don't. Fly a quick loop behind the transformer bay to confirm the oil level dropping, then drop the drone in a pond and walk away. Send a drone to hover in front of a camera for 20 seconds at 3 sites to force operators to log nuisance alarms. Stack enough nuisance, and you slow the brain just enough for the physics to run ahead. What nobody wants to admit is how little it takes to create strategic effects. You don't need precision explosives or insider keys. A few synchronized, low-skill actions aimed at the right assets can produce N2 or N3 conditions across regions that weren't planning to share pain that night. Under-frequency load shedding will try to save the machine, but shedding while blind risks cutting the wrong blocks, stranding hospitals without knowing it, and tripping cold load pickup loops that make restoration more brittle. Why it works comes back to the choke points. Extra high voltage transformers can't be replaced quickly. Large spares are mismatched or far. Control houses bundle nerves in one small building that relies on local AC for HVAC. Fiber trunks enter exactly where a contractor found it easiest a decade ago. Even with fast utility response, the first hours belong to physics and logistics. Replace oil, you need a truck, a clean supply, and time for degassing. Replace fiber. You need a splice and a crew under lights while deputies block a lane. Weather magnifies everything. Hit lines and transformers during a heat wave, and sags and ratings shrink the options. Hit during a cold snap, and gas supply falters on its own, doubling the stack. Make the events just far enough apart that each control room thinks it owns a local mess, and you delay the call for regional help that would tighten frequency and share reserves. Every missed minute is another swing before damping catches. None of this is a blueprint. It's an uncomfortable truth about exposed surfaces. The machine rewards patience and punishes speed. A cheap, quiet plan beats loud theatrics. And intent, aimed at the seams and the choke points, turns accidents like that dim night into something much harder to stop. Case studies, Metcalf, Ukraine, and the lessons we ignored. Started a fence line south of San Jose, April 16, 2013. A service road, a chain-link perimeter, and a substation that fed Silicon Valley's load like an artery. The attackers didn't need to cross the fence. They unscrewed 2 manhole covers and cut fiber leading into the yard. Then, using a rifle and a rest, they fired into radiator banks and transformer cases from outside the property, walking rounds across fins to drain oil. In 19 minutes, they knocked out 17 transformers. They left in the dark the way they came. No slogans, no manifesto, just method. What mattered wasn't the body count of equipment, it was the craft. They knew where the fiber entered. They understood that hitting the bottom of a radiator accelerates oil loss. They shot through a chain-link fence, accounting for deflection. They paced the job to avoid overheating barrels and to keep the sound from drawing a quick response. The operators kept lights on by rerouting, but that wasn't the point. Metcalf proved a substation could be turned off with simple tools and patience, and that the replacement window for big iron doesn't fit inside a news cycle. Investigators and utility engineers read the report with a shiver. Ballistic walls went up around some banks. Cameras got better. Perimeters thickened at the sites with budgets and attention. Elsewhere, the fixes were thinner, signage, lighting, hope. Insurance policies evolved faster than concrete. Risk shifted on paper, deductibles, exclusions, force majeure, while the hardware stayed in place. Now jump east, past fences to keyboards. Ukraine, December 23, 2015. Office hours. Operators at 3 distribution companies watched their cursors move across screens they weren't touching. Breakers began opening one by one, remotely, as if an invisible hand leaned over their shoulders. The attackers had spent months inside the networks, mapping, learning vendor tools, rehearsing. When they struck, they used the same remote access software the utilities used every day, plus wiper malware to brick workstations and phone systems. In about 6 hours, they cut power to around 225,000 customers. The detail that still lands: they locked out the operators and then sent crews to the field to flip manual switches to slow restoration. They jammed call centers so customers couldn't report what was out. They hit uninterruptible power supplies in control rooms to darken screens. It was the same grid logic in a different accent. Attack nerves, break trust in the picture, force manual work under pressure. The lights came back the same day, but the lesson stayed. Digital access can move breakers as surely as a hand in a relay cabinet. A year later, Ukraine again, Kiev, 2016. This time a more automated strike at a transmission substation. Fewer human-in-the-loop clicks, more code, Industria speaking industrial protocols to protection devices. The attackers understood grid semantics, how to talk IEC and trip breakers in sequence. They used a wiper again and a logic bomb to complicate restoration. The outage was shorter, but the signal was louder. If someone bothers to learn your device's language, they can push the same buttons you can, faster. Across the border of industries, another data point. A German steel mill, 2014. Attackers pivoted from it into a plant and caused physical damage by preventing a blast furnace from shutting down in a controlled way. Different sector, same anatomy, legacy control, trust paths, physics turned against the owner. It underlined the uncomfortable truth. You don't need perfect access to trigger expensive breakage when controls assume good intent. So what changed here? After Metcalf, some sites added ballistic shielding and moved fiber entries inside the fence. Some utilities hardened control houses, separated AC feeds for HVAC, and added redundant communications. After Ukraine, utilities accelerated multi-factor authentication for remote access, tightened vendor tunnels, and added out-of-band monitoring to cross-check SCADA. Industry groups wrote playbooks. Exercises ran. People practiced calling each other faster. And what didn't change? Lead times. The scarcity of large transformers grew worse. Distribution transformer shortages spilled into headlines, but extra high-voltage units were the real pinch. Standardization crawled. Spare programs remained constrained by mismatched designs and legal agreements that moved slower than crisis clocks. Regulatory incentives still favored today's rate relief over capital set aside for a maybe. Insurance shifted incentives too. Carriers raised premiums, narrowed coverage, and pushed liability onto asset owners and vendors. That pressure produced checklists, more cameras, more logs, but did conjure transformer factories, retrained relay technicians, or new DC ties. It made boards ask, are we compliant? More often than are we resilient? Compliance mattered. Attackers don't care. Meanwhile, the grid added millions of inverters that play by different rules. Ukraine's second strike targeted transmission controls, not inverter farms, but the interaction risk grew. Ride-through settings became national debates after disturbances in Australia and Europe. Here, operators began asking for grid-forming behavior in pockets while they still relied on synchronous inertia elsewhere. The transition widened the surface. The meta lesson from all three cases is boring and hard. Attackers mix patient reconnaissance with simple tools. They aim for choke points and confidence. They don't need to break everything. They need to break a few things in the right order and force you to make rushed choices. Defenders have to be good everywhere, while carrying the dead weight of aging iron, slow supply chains, and human fatigue. The stories rhyme across fences and fiber. While that was happening in California and Kiev, one state chose to stand alone for speed and sovereignty. Texas wrote its own rules and lived the upside until weather wrote the bill. Texas, isolation by design, failure by weather. Texas didn't stumble into independence, it engineered it. Decades ago, lawmakers and utilities kept wires inside the state line to avoid federal jurisdiction. That choice hardened into physics. ERCOT became a single balancing authority, a market and control room that answered mostly to Austin, not Washington. In normal weather, the model felt slick, fast dispatch, lean reserve margins, prices that cracked a whip at generators. The risk was always off-stage, when the fence also kept help out. February 2021 dragged that risk into the light. Cold marched south and sat on the state like a hand over a mouth. Gas wells froze at the tree, gathering lines sludged, and compressor stations drew more power just as their feeds stuttered. Coal piles crusted, plant sensors lied, heat rates climbed, and some units simply wouldn't start. Wind lost output in places, so did gas and coal in bigger slices. By the early hours, ERCOT watched its resource stack shed weight faster than operators could prop it up. Frequency began to slide toward a cliff. In the control room, the calculus turned brutal. If they didn't dump load, the whole interconnection risked a collapse that could take weeks to rebuild. They ordered the largest manual load shed in US history. Neighborhoods went dark in blocks, then stayed dark as restoration hit cold load pickup walls. Under those rolling blackouts sat a number that would haunt the postmortems: 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how close the system came to a full blackout, not metaphorically, literally a handful of grid cycles from lights out everywhere inside the fence. Isolation sharpened every edge. Those DC ties to neighbors, they existed, but they were eyedroppers against a house fire. Imports couldn't flood in the way they do across the eastern seams. ERCOT's market design, scarcity pricing meant to shout at investors, did its job on paper, spiking to the cap. But price signals don't thaw valves, fix plant heat tracing, or conjure black start capacity you didn't contract. The physics set the tempo, the market chased behind. Black start planning in Texas looked adequate on a map. On the night, the details bit. Some units that carried the black start tag struggled in the cold. Auxiliary systems needed power that wasn't where it was supposed to be. Crews had to navigate iced roads to reach switches that hadn't been touched in years. Re-energizing lines risked tripping on cold load surges. Restoration became a careful creep, not a steady march. Meanwhile, pipes burst, hospitals rationed diesel, and water systems lost pressure. Political aftermath was loud. Hearings, finger-pointing, and a rush of winterization promises filled the weeks after. Rules tightened on paper. Plants were told to insulate, heat trace, and test. Gas suppliers were told to register as critical load to avoid rolling outages. A new weatherization regime arrived, with inspections and fines. Some operators did the work. Others did enough to pass a checklist. The first winters after Uri ran milder in key moments, and the story started to fade. Compliance is a flaw. The storm doesn't care. ERCOT's structure remained the same: fast, self-contained, and exposed when the state-scale correlation hits. Heat waves brought a different flavor of the same stress. Afternoon loads smashed records, and dispatch leaned on everything: wind over the plains, solar at noon, gas peakers at dusk, batteries to bridge the step down. Reserve margins improved on paper, but many megawatts lived in fragile corners: fuel limited, weather limited, or new fleets still learning their controls. Curtailments of renewable output appeared not because there was too much energy, but because voltage and stability constraints pinched transfer paths. The gas-electric handshake stayed messy. Generators buy gas in markets that assume power will flow to compressors. Electric utilities count on gas showing up without seeing the upstream bottlenecks. During cold snaps, both systems become each other's precondition. ERCOT can't order gas to flow. Pipeline operators can't order electrons to reach their stations when feeders are being shed. Federal help on standards stopped at the fence. Coordination improved around the edges, lists of critical facilities, better comms, but the hard structural fix remained elusive. And those DC ties, calls to add more, always run into the same wall: politics and permits. More interconnection would mean more federal oversight, plus new corridors through land that doesn't want them. Proposals to build back-to-back converters on the edge or to upgrade existing links inch through studies, while load grows faster than paperwork. The irony stands: the cheapest resilience megawatt may be a tie you hope to never max out. The check arrives before the vote. Here's where the lesson returns to people. During Uri, distribution crews stood in ice fog closing manual switches with gloved hands so a hospital could get one feeder over another. Operators watched frequency, calculating how much more to cut without breaking a refinery's restart sequence. Families burned furniture. Plumbers became first responders. ERCOT didn't fail to care. It failed to have enough slack inside a fence that weather can cross in an hour. Texas chose isolation. It got speed and sovereignty. It also got a thinner margin for mistakes and a smaller cushion when nature sinks its punches. The fence is real. The weather doesn't see it. The seams, weak DC links, and regulatory friction. While Texas was icing over, something else defined the limits of help: the seams. Along the borders where the eastern and western hearts touch, and where ERCOT brushes both, power only crosses through a handful of high-voltage DC converters. Think of them as valves between pressure systems. They're precise, controllable, and small. That control is the upside. You can meter stress, stabilize angles, and shut the door fast if trouble tries to move. The downside is capacity. In a crunch, they're eyedroppers feeding a grid that needs fire hoses. These converters sit at places with dry names: back-to-back stations, terminals at the ends of long lines. but their decisions whisper through frequency everywhere. When an operator in the east opens a valve westward, they're trading stability margin for relief. The trouble is, the installed valves number in the fews and tens, not dozens in parallel. Their ratings were set for commerce, not mutual defense. When heat domes park across time zones or cold bites from Alberta to the Gulf, those megawatts get spoken for instantly. The seams hold their ground, and the islands ride it out alone. Why don't we build bigger valves? Start with land. A single HVDC corridor can require easements across ranches, farms, tribal lands, and national forests. Each parcel has a voice. County boards argue setbacks. Homeowner groups lawyer up. Environmental reviews measure birds, viewsheds, and soils, then get appealed. Even when a line mostly rides existing rights-of-way, turning that into a new voltage class triggers hearings that last longer than a transformer lead time. By the time a utility wins, the load forecast has shifted, and the project's economics need another filing. Then stack the agencies. FERC approves interstate transmission rates and reliability standards. State commissions approve siting and cost recovery. Regional planners run their own studies. Federal land managers own corridors you can't skip. A developer can spend 5 years getting a map and still lack the authority to plant a single steel pole. Meanwhile, every opponent only needs one court to stall the train. NIMBY, not in my backyard, has a twin in Banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. Reliability needs aren't abstract, but in a quiet year they sound like scare tactics in a hearing room. Inside the interconnections, the friction continues. The East isn't one market, it's a quilt. PJM, MISO, SBP, NYISO, ISO-NI, each with a planning manual and tariff stack. A line that crosses 2 regions has to clear 2 sets of benefit tests: reliability, economic, policy. If it doesn't pencil in both, it sits. Merchant developers try to thread the needle with HVDC projects that sell point-to-point capacity to whoever bids, but they still need land and permits. Policy thinks in terms of decarbonization targets and affordability today. Wires promise benefits over decades and cost money now. Utilities don't rush to help competitors either. A new seam can shift congestion rents, strand old plants, and change who gets paid to be essential. Incumbents are polite in public filings and careful in private. They collaborate to the edge of their incentives. Regional entities write coordinated into charters. Lawyers write exceptions into contracts. The result is a maze where a good idea has a short half-life without an unusually stubborn sponsor. Proposals for a national HVDC backbone keep landing on desks. The idea is simple: overlay a few thousand miles of high-capacity DC that can swing power between the 3 hearts, smooth weather, and catch regional falls before they become cascades. Studies show the math working: diverse wind in the plains balancing solar in the deserts, batteries bridging dusk in one place with noon somewhere else. The objections come as a litany: who pays, who benefits, who controls the switches, whose view gets the towers. Without a single planner in charge, the epic becomes a patchwork of local fights. Even where seams already exist, they're not frictionless. Converter stations need maintenance outages, control systems evolve, and firmware in one terminal drifts out of compatibility with its mate. During fire season, the AC lines feeding the DC terminals get derated, strangling the valve before you touch its setpoint. In winter, ice loading forces temporary limits. Operators with SCADA trade caution for capacity. The system favors conservative transfers on bad days, exactly when you wish it would reach farther. There's a governance gap too. FERC's reliability authority reaches across the East and West, but not into ERCOT the same way. Coordinating standards at a seam means agreeing to rules nobody wants to be alone in enforcing. Cyber posture varies. Remedial action schemes that span borders require test beds, joint drills, and trust. The failure mode is paper, a plan that lives in a shared folder and dies in the first minute of a real event because the phone tree didn't update. Yet the need keeps growing. Data centers spring up far from big dams and nukes. Factories hungry for megawatts return to states that haven't built new backbone in decades. Renewables grow where they're least politically painful, not where existing wires point. The seams feel that misalignment first. Power wants to flow east-west in a grid whose arteries were laid north-south. Without new valves, operators burn margin to steer around bottlenecks, then cross their fingers when weather synchronizes the punch. So picture the first hours of a multi-region hit with this context. The valves open to their limits, alarms insist they're near. Dispatchers call neighbors and get the same answer. We're tight too. Meanwhile, political promises about sharing across the nation meet a control room reality. We did, it's maxed, and physics takes it from here. The seam isn't a conspiracy. It's a design choice that made sense when big plants sat near big cities and where the correlation lived in smaller footprints. Today, the correlation stretches, the seams stayed small. 48 hours in the dark, a clockwork walkthrough. Hour to 3 is noise turning into pattern. The first trips look like nuisance, one corridor shedding, a plant soft failing on cold sensors, a relay behaving touchy. Operators issue redispatch, then under-frequency protection starts shaving load without waiting for permission. In neighborhoods, the first flickers arrive like a shrug. Elevators pause, ATMs apologize. Inside control rooms, frequency refuses to settle. The DC valves at the seams hit their limits, their alarms keep chiming. Dispatchers recite scripts, stabilize, conserve inertia, preserve black start units. They know what's next if the slide doesn't stop. By hour 4, the map isn't a map anymore, it's islands. Some hold at 59.4 with ugly voltage, others blink out clean. A gas compressor station upstream of a power plant loses its feed and spins down. The plant's output drifts, then drops. The compensation that was supposed to arrive never does because a distant substation's control house sits silent, fiber cut, RTUs dumb. In homes, people switch to battery lanterns that came with camping gear. In hospitals, diesel tanks start their countdown. Pharmacy fridges begin their quiet race with time. Hour 6 is logistics. Utilities put mutual aid on the radio line, trucks rolling, crews paired for safety, staging yards opening at fairgrounds. Law enforcement blocks intersections to clear routes for fuel deliveries. The first problem, fuel. Gas stations can't pump without power. Diesel for hospital generators becomes a scavenger hunt guided by paper maps and phone calls that barely go through. Water utilities ask for priority feeds. They fear losing pressure and triggering boil notices that cities can't communicate at scale. Hour 8 to 12, the cascade moves off the grid and into everything attached to it. Data centers hum on UPS and generators that were tested monthly, not run at full tilt for days. Some switch to save mode, shedding non-critical compute. Others keep selling services, watching fuel burn rates strip their margin. Telecommunication towers run on small batteries, 4, maybe 8 hours, then drop. Texts angle through survivors, rumors outrun facts. A refinery goes quiet, then flares, a pipeline slows, then issues a pressure advisory. Industrial loads call their utilities. We can cold shut down safely if you keep us up for 30 minutes. Some get the favor, many don't. Meanwhile, operators confront cold load pickup traps. They restore a feeder, and every dormant thermostat and stalled motor lunges at once. Current spikes, breakers get hot, and the feeder trips again. Crews try manual sectionalizing, energizing one block at a time, waiting for the surge to subside, repeating. The pattern is slow and humbling. In one city, a hospital loses a restored line when a neighboring mal yanks too hard. The crew returns, rewrites the switching order with a Sharpie, and starts over. Hour 12 to 18, the grid's black start choreography begins where it can. Hydro units light up local buses, raise voltage and frequency into a window, and invite a second machine in. Gas turbines with on-site fuel try their starts. Some succeed, some choke on cold auxiliaries. Operators glue their eyes to synchroscopes, waiting for phases to line up. One miscue trips a substation back to black. Nothing breaks, but confidence does. A supervisor orders a slower ramp. Patience earns minutes, minutes are fuel. Hospitals call for diesel and get told the truck is stuck behind a bridge weight limit debate because a neighboring county won't waive it on the fly. Pharmacies move insulin into trailers with dry ice. Senior centers ask for generator hookups that don't exist. Water plants queue for portable generators that are already spoken for by wastewater facilities. Sewer backups don't wait politely. Fire departments preposition crews at intersections because traffic signals are out. and collisions are climbing. Hour 18 to 24 is the first wave of panic buying, made stranger by dark stores and dead card readers. Cash becomes king again, briefly, ATMs are out, and small shops open with hand calculators and notebooks. Police watch lines form outside fuel depots that haven't opened because pumps need power. Social media fills the gap with maps that may or may not be real. A rumor says the downtown hospital lost power entirely. It didn't, but a clinic did. People drive toward lights that turn out to be generator banks behind fences. Inside utilities, the day shift relieves the night with shoulders already tight. Sleep was a rumor. Call trees keep ringing to bring retired operators back for phone support. They remember switch numbers by heart. Engineers debate whether to risk a long 345 kV line that would bridge two healthy islands. If it holds, both strengthen. If it trips, they waste hours they don't have. The tie is energized at minimum load. It sings, then settles. A small cheer echoes in a windowless room. Hour 24 to 30, fuel logistics choke in earnest. Gas generators lean harder on line gas that shows up colder and lower pressure. A few dual fuel units switch to oil, deliveries lag. One plant miscalculates and trips on low fuel pressure. The local island sags and sheds load to survive. Data centers ration compute more aggressively and call fuel brokers with larger checks. Brokers call anyone with a tanker and a waiver for driving hours. Some get through. Some get stuck behind a train that timed out because its signals died. Telecom backbones are now a patchwork. Routers reboot on dirty generator power. Fiber rings that promised resilience reveal single points where both sides share a duct. 911 centers route calls to neighboring counties that route them back. Emergency managers move to radio nets that work as long as towers do. A town switches to firehouse bulletin boards and a pickup with a loudspeaker looping streets. Boil water, check on neighbors, conserve fuel. Hour 30 to 36, restoration plays chess with cold load again. Temperatures drop at night, thermostats reset lower, the morning surge looms. Operators schedule a dawn push to energize feeders serving water plants and fuel depots before neighborhoods. It's triage. People online call it unfair if they can still post. Crews install temporary generation at a critical substation house because its HVAC died and relays need climate. A borrowed chiller shows up on a flatbed, tied down with hope. By hour 36, the economic tally becomes a drumbeat in background briefings. Manufacturers miss shifts. Grocery warehouses toss pallets of milk. Pharmacies run out of certain meds when delivery trucks can't leave depots. City finance officers ask when to expect overtime reimbursement and whether their bonds will be downgraded after this quarter. The answers are fog. Insurance adjusters start lists. Lawyers draft letters. Hour 36 to 42, fatigue breeds mistakes. A crew opens the wrong knife switch because a stencil is faded. Nothing catastrophic happens, but it wastes 30 minutes. An operator misreads a stale telemetry tag and orders a plant to ramp beyond a safe point. A colleague catches it. Supervisors add second checklists and enforce breaks the crews resist. A lineman admits he can't feel his fingertips and is sent to a truck to warm up. He sulks for 2 minutes, then sleeps. And then a hinge, hour 42. A thin backbone emerges across two islands. Transfers stabilize. Under-frequency relays stop firing on their own and wait for actual emergencies. Voltage support arrives near a metro core that's been limping on distributed generation and goodwill. A hospital switches from generator to utility feed, one feeder at a time, while a nurse watches monitors like a hawk. The ICU barely notices. The cafeteria cheers. By hour 48, the story splits. Some cities hum at 80%, expecting rolling outages through the week but feeling the turn. Others remain dark, stuck behind a broken transformer, a missing spare, or a span that needs a helicopter to reach. The control rooms relax half an inch and then stiffen. The next 48 hours are harder. Fragile gear under stress, tired people making precise moves, politics heating up while steel cools down. The meter on cost, trust, and time doesn't pause when the first lights return. The price tag, $7 trillion, and the hidden ledgers. The lights come back in patches, but the bill doesn't wait for full brightness. Economists start with the obvious. GDP shudders when factories idle, offices go dark, and ports slow to a crawl. Equity markets discount future cash flows in a hurry, utilities on the hook for repairs, data center IITs that burned diesel, manufacturers missing quarters. Pension funds feel that slide in the same hour grocery clerks throw out spoiled stock. Supply chains that run just in time meet a pause button that doesn't care about quarterly targets. Food is a quiet catastrophe. Cold chains break from warehouse to checkout, milk, meat, insulin, vaccines. A refrigerated truck sitting in a yard through a 12-hour outage becomes a lost ledger item. Replace it, maybe, if the upstream plant didn't also lose power and raw inputs. Water treatment misses a step, then issues boil notices that require power to follow. Wastewater plants overflow, and suddenly there's a secondary cleanup tab no one planned into rate cases. The public only sees empty shelves and long lines. The accountants see write-offs and claims. Insurance firms pull out clipboards, then exclusions. Acts of God blur into infrastructure failure, and coverage shrinks around the edges. Business interruption payouts hinge on policy language most owners never read closely. Municipalities file for emergency aid, while their bond ratings get a side eye from agencies worried about deferred maintenance and rising climate risk. Borrowing costs tick up a notch. Over a decade, that notch compounds into fewer projects, postponed substations, and a slower rebuild curve. Small businesses carry fragile margins. A neighborhood restaurant loses inventory 2 service days, then spends 3 more on cleanup. Payroll still lands. Rent doesn't pause. A salon with no generator misses a week and watches customers drift to a competitor on the other side of the feeder. Some close, not because of one outage, but because this one landed after 3 rough quarters. Tax bases thin where closures cluster. Cities feel it in sales tax dips just as overtime bills arrive. The replacement cycle is the hidden mountain. Extra high-voltage transformers have lead times measured in years when the market is calm. In a global squeeze, quotes slide into 3 to 5. Distribution transformers, cheaper but legion, were already scarce. Prices climbed several multiples while orders lined up. Every damaged unit joins a queue, and utilities triage, repair, remanufacture, or wait. Each option costs more than last year's budget imagined, and crews that can do the work are already booked. Lines need hardware needs steel, porcelain, polymers, and skilled hands. Grain-oriented electrical steel isn't made on every corner. Substation breakers don't ship next day. Crews require staging, cranes, road permits, and quiet weather windows. The cyber cleanup runs in parallel. Malware on operator desktops and historian servers demands forensic work, rebuilds, and new segmentation. Those bills don't show up under storm damage, but they belong to the same story. Meanwhile, capital markets reevaluate risk. Utilities that looked dull and safe suddenly look like climate-exposed, cyber-targeted infrastructure plays. Investors ask about spare programs, vendor diversification, and rate recovery certainty. If a regulator balks at passing costs through, the balance sheet carries the load. That spreads into higher financing costs for everyone trying to build better. A project delayed a year costs more for reasons that look like bad luck, but trace back to policy choices and slow factories. Households pay twice. First at the store, higher prices for scarcer goods, then on the bill months later when riders recover storm and restoration costs. Some states smooth that bump over years, others let it land. Either way, the money leaves. Energy poverty creeps upward as fixed incomes meet variable surcharges. The politics become noisy, but the meter keeps spinning. Now zoom out. Analysts who add the direct physical replacements, the lost output, the medical and social costs of outages, the risk premiums in financing, and the drag on new projects tally numbers not in billions, but in the low trillions for a multi-region prolonged event. 7 trillion isn't a single check. It's a decade of friction, compounded delays, higher capex, stranded investments, and the lost growth of projects that never break ground because the last crisis ate their budget. The grid is a balance sheet as much as its wires. When it breaks, the ledger fills faster than the lights return. The fixes we keep postponing. After every near miss, the memos arrive with the same headline: we know what to do. Then the calendar turns, budgets tighten, and the list ages. Start with transformers. Industry-built spare programs, STEP, grid assurance, bilateral compacts to pre-position big iron. On paper, they're lifelines, standardized ratings, pre-negotiated logistics, and mutual aid that moves beyond line trucks. In practice, fit and law slow the promise. A spares impedance mismatch can threaten stability. A tap changer set for one corridor won't match another. Rigid bus won't meet bushing centers. Lawyers add clauses about liability for misfits and damage in transit. Meanwhile, the spare sits, oil aging under a tarp. Harden the yards, we say. Some utilities do. Ballistic walls around banks, opaque fencing, redesigned fiber entries that rise well inside the fence before diving into conduit. Segment the control house so HVAC failures don't cook relays. Add dual station service transformers and separate the feeds. Good fixes until a rate case shaves capex or a substation's footprint can't accept new walls without regrading and outages. Then a cheaper compromise wins. A few cameras, a brighter light pole, a laminated sign with a phone number. Redundancy in communications should be easy. It isn't. Fiber routes share long trenches because rights-of-way are scarce. Microwave hops backstop a fiber cut until fog or ice turns them into ghosts. The fix is physical separation. Route B in a different corridor, a separate entry, diverse carriers with truly diverse paths. It costs real money and coordination with neighbors. When storms don't hit that district for a few years, the work slides. A future after-action report will circle the same diagram and underline the same single duct. Relays are the grid's reflexes. Modernizing them is a bargain compared to the cost of a single bad trip. Wide area situational awareness, phaser data, fast analytics, turns mushy pictures into crisp ones. Utilities know this. The bottleneck is the migration path. Old electromechanical or early digital relays sit in panels wired by hands that retired. Drawings don't always match reality. Replacements require outages in crowded switchyards, and every outage risks a missed deadline on a renewable interconnection or a market penalty. So fleets run mixed, new logic next to old curves, tuned to avoid surprises, which is another way of saying tuned to stay timid. There's a path to buy time with physics. Inertia, once free from spinning machines, can be emulated. Grid-forming inverters, batteries, wind, solar with the right controls, can set voltage and frequency locally, add synthetic inertia and fast frequency response, and ride through disturbances instead of ducking them. Operators are running pilots. Some islands and pockets already use them as anchors. The catch is scale and certainty. You need enough of them, configured to support, not just sell energy. You need standards that make different vendors play nice and market rules that pay for headroom. Headroom means not running full. Not running full means lost revenue unless the tariff recognizes the service. Until that's solved, project ship in grid following mode and promise, firmware later. Operator training is the quiet lever. The best control rooms run drills with real stakes, tabletop plus live fire, simulated cascades that force hard choices. Cross-entity exercises teach operators to call neighbors early, share scarce inertia, and coordinate remedial schemes across seams. These drills also reveal gaps, stale phone trees, mismatched thresholds, conflicting load shed priorities. Everyone nods, vows to fix, then hits staffing limits. The pipeline of apprentices to journeymen to senior operators is thin. Burnout makes it thinner. Training budgets are an easy trim when rates rise. Cyber segmentation isn't glamorous, but it works. Move from flat networks to bay-level zones. Enforce strict, temporary vendor access with jump hosts and multi-factor. Sign firmware. Monitor for anomalies tuned to power, not email. Build out-of-band sensors, PMUs, traveling wave monitors that don't trust a single SCADA stream. The obstacles are everywhere. 199's cabinets with no room, legacy RTUs with CPU headroom measured in crumbs, vendor stacks that break under strict rules, and maintenance windows that vanish in summer heat. Utilities chip away, but the backlog grows faster than the fixes land. Cooling and fiber redundancy have cousins, auxiliary support. Control houses need HVAC, and their HVAC needs power that shouldn't share with the yard. Add UPS with days, not hours, of runtime. Keep portable chillers and quick connects staged. Test them under load, not in a parking lot. Crews ask for this after every event. Procurement asks for justification before the event. The governance problem sits beneath all of it. Standards bodies can mandate "thou shalt," but enforcement has teeth only when fines exceed the cost of delay and public pressure holds steady. State commissions approve rates that fund resilience. Their mandate is affordability now. Utilities answer to both. It encourages incrementalism, a pilot here, a wall there, a spare ordered when headlines are fresh. Projects that would move the needle: a new HVDC valve, a regional spare factory, a comprehensive relay fleet refresh, compete with 100 deferred needs. None of this requires a miracle. It requires discipline. Pick the substations that matter most, harden them completely, split comms, modernize relays, and lock in fuel and black start the way we lock in capacity. Contract headroom in batteries for frequency support. Pay for drills like we pay for insurance. And treat transformer suppliers national security, domestic steel, standardized designs, factories that run even when orders dip. The fixes are dull. The alternative is loud. The inverter era, stability trade-offs we don't grasp yet. We are swapping spinning steel for code. Every year, more megawatts arrive through power electronics, wind turbines with converters, solar farms behind inverters, batteries that speak in switching pulses. They're precise, fast, and if you program them right, capable of holding a grid together. If you program them wrong, or ask them to do a job they weren't designed to do, they disappear the second the ground shakes. The old machine carried inertia for free. A 500 megawatt turbine was a flywheel attached to your grid. Lose a plant, and that stored energy leaked out across a few seconds, softening the drop. Inverter fleets don't spin. Their default mode is grid following. Look at the grid's voltage and angle through a phase-locked loop, then inject power along for the ride. It's efficient on a strong grid. On a weak grid, the very act of following can chase a moving target and make the wobble worse. Engineers know the pivot, grid-forming controls. Instead of asking what's the grid doing, a grid-forming inverter says, here's a voltage and frequency, hold on to me. With droop settings and virtual inertia, it can act like a small synchronous machine, sharing load, damping swings, taking the first punch without tripping. Labs have proved the concept. Islands and microgrids have lived on it for years. The challenge isn't does it work. It's how many, how coordinated, and who pays for staying ready. Headroom is the first trade. A battery that keeps 20% state of charge for frequency support can save you when a plant trips. That same battery makes less on arbitrage and ancillary markets if it must sit partly empty. A solar farm that reserves inverter capacity for dynamic voltage support curtails sellable megawatt hours at noon. Markets rarely pay for the empty space until after the day it would have saved. Developers ship grid following now, promising firmware upgrades later. Later collides with interconnection queues, validation tests, and a utility's risk tolerance. Interoperability is the second trade. A grid-forming battery from one vendor needs to share the stage with a wind plant from another and a gas unit with a vintage AVR. Their controls can sing together or fight each other. Tune droop too aggressively, and multiple grid formers chase the same error, overshoot, and oscillate. Tune it too gently, and they act polite while the frequency falls. Getting the mix right requires system-level models that include details vendors don't love to disclose and utilities don't always have time to build. Faults expose the third trade. Synchronous machines spit out fault current like a reflex, giving relays a tall, obvious signal. Inverters limit current to protect themselves. Protection schemes built on big fault spikes can hesitate when the spike is small. You can redesign protection for low inertia, inverter-dominated systems, new relays, new algorithms, traveling wave detection, but that's a fleet transition. For years, protection will live between worlds. Hidden failures migrate from thermal corners to firmware edge cases. Ride-through settings are the fourth trade. In one event, you want inverters to hold steady through voltage sags and frequency bumps. In another, you need them to drop to prevent a local collapse. Settings are negotiated through interconnection studies and standards that trail reality by a season. Get them too tight, and you lose a gigawatt in a millisecond when a harmless blip crosses a line. Too loose, and you prop up a pocket that drags a region into worse trouble. The line between helpful and harmful cuts through a spreadsheet nobody wants to sign in ink. Black start used to mean diesel at a hydro gate or a small gas unit waking a big one. Batteries can do it now, form a bus, energize auxiliaries, bring a plant online, then step back. Pilots have done it. Scaling means mapping sequences across dozens of sites, improving comms under stress, and practicing with field crews who still smell their way through a substation. Every new black start path is a plan plus muscle memory. We're short on both. The fifth trade is visibility. Phaser networks give millisecond eyes, EMS gives seconds. Inverter fleets move in milliseconds. If your control room's picture is late, you'll either clamp down on aggressive controls to avoid surprises or trust them and accept that operators will sometimes chase ghosts. Wide area damping controllers and grid-forming setpoints can coordinate, but only if comms are diverse and clean. That brings us back to fiber routes and microwave links, the physical weak points underneath the digital promise. None of this argues against inverters. It argues for owning the transition. Hybrid systems, synchronous condensers adding inertia and fault current, grid-forming batteries setting the beat, wind and solar following cleanly, give operators tools instead of constraints. But hybrids are messy to plan and slow to permit. They live in budgets that don't include a line item for stability margin. Until that changes, we'll add clean megawatts faster than we add the control craft that keeps them from stepping on each other. We can get this right. Pay for headroom, require grid-forming capability at scale, standardize controls, modernize protection, and drill black start with batteries as anchors. Do it before we are forced to at 3 a.m., when the grid is already slipping and the fastest devices are waiting for permission from a rulebook that never pictured them. Who's in charge when nobody's in charge? From the operator's chair, the grid looks unified. Step back, and it's a patchwork stitched with acronyms. Investor-owned utilities own wires in one county, municipal utilities on the next. Rural co-ops span counties with shoestring budgets. Over them sit ISOs and RTOs, PJM, MISO, SPP, CASO, ISO-NI, NYSO, each running markets and dispatch inside their footprint. ERCOT's its own universe. None of them owns the steel, they choreograph it. Standards come from NERC, rules for reliability, protection, cyber. They're mandatory and fines hurt. But standards land through regional entities with audit cycles measured in years. A relay miss set today might be noticed at the next compliance check or after an event. The teeth are real, the jaws slow. Utilities designed to pass audits and keep rates stable. Resilience lives between lines that say shall and budgets that say not this quarter. State public utility commissions set the tempo for spending. Their mandate is affordability and service quality now. Approve a ballistic wall, customers pay. Approve 10, bills rise. Commissioners ask for proof, risk models, cost-benefit, alternatives. The grid's worst days look like hypotheticals until they aren't. Rate cases shave contingencies. Capital plans drift toward near-term upgrades and away from deep hardening. No single PUC sees the national picture. Each sees voters and bills. Federal players overlap. FERC approves interstate transmission rates and reliability standards. DOE funds research and big bets, convenes after crises, and nudges toward policy goals. DHS handles critical infrastructure and threat intel. FBI investigates intrusions. CISA writes advisories. When a cyber-physical event lands at 2 a.m., the first calls go to neighbors, not Washington. By sunrise, inboxes fill with forms and briefings. Coordination improves with practice. Practice is sporadic. In the control stack, cyber oversight mirrors the ownership maze. Corporate IT runs identity, laptops, cloud. OT runs substations, relays, plant controls. Vendor remote access threads both. CIP standards push segmentation and access control, but vendor tunnels and jump hosts become exceptions that grow. A trusted integrator gets a standing connection to fix one thing, then support creeps. Everyone signs off because outages are expensive, and the next maintenance window is months out. Procurement freezes time. A utility specs a relay family in 2012, trains crews, stocks spares, and writes procedures. In 2025, that family's still buying time because qualifying a new vendor means retraining, redrawing panels, rerunning protection studies, and reopening CIP paperwork. The result is 199's assumptions embedded in 202's networks, surrounded by compensating controls and tribal knowledge. The people who remember why a setting is weird are retiring. During events, authority fractures. ISOs can order generation and transmission within their footprint, They can't tell a city to keep a hospital on if the feeder upstream is failing. Distribution utilities own the last mile and choose which neighborhoods get restored first. Pipeline control rooms decide gas flows on a logic different from power dispatch. Emergency managers issue curfews and fuel waivers. Governors call press conferences and ask for interstate help that requires permits, waivers, and legal cover. Everyone means well. No one owns the whole picture. Teams make it messier. A line that binds two RTOs needs both to agree on flows, constraints, and remedial schemes. If one's conservative and the other's aggressive, transfers default to the cautious side. Cross-border cyber drills happen, but not often enough. Joint remedial action schemes exist on paper. Some were tested last year. Others live as diagrams awaiting outages that never align with calendars. When alarms stack, people revert to what they control. Accountability hides in the gaps. After an outage, reports arrive with recommendations and timelines. Some require commission votes, others tariff changes, others capital that competes with renewable interconnections and routine replacements. A city council balks at rate hikes, a legislature caps spending, a utility trims the plan. 2 years later, a similar event hits, and the same paragraphs get reissued with new dates. There's a way to make this less brittle without inventing a czar. Give seems a home, standing joint control groups with authority to set and test cross-entity schemes quarterly. Fund regional spare, transformer pools with standardized specs and indemnity pre-arranged. Tie resilience spending to measurable outcomes, restoration time targets, black start path diversity, comms route diversity, and let utilities earn on hitting them. Map vendor remote access like a substation asset and require time-bounded, audited sessions. Most of all, treat operators like a national CADA, shared curricula, exchanges across regions, drills that cross markets and state lines. When nobody is in charge, craft lives in the people who pick up the phone first and know exactly who to call next. Human moments, the operators, linemen, and quiet heroes. Night shift smells like burnt coffee and ozone. An operator rubs his eyes, counts to 5, and calls a shed that keeps a NICU stable while a MAL stays dark. He doesn't cheer. He writes the timestamp and moves to the next feeder. A lineman steps from a truck into sleet, shoulders a hot stick, and works a manual switch by feel because the stencil wore off years ago. He taps the steel once with his glove, habit, listens for the buzz, and nods. His partner spots him, quiet on the radio. In a substation, a tech cracks a cabinet and frowns. The relay smells wrong, sweet, metallic. She's seen that before. She swaps the unit, re-terminates, and leaves a note for a kid who'll inherit the panel one day. A dispatcher talks a plant through a slow restart, voice steady while his hands shake. Later, he'll drive home past dark blocks and sit in a quiet kitchen, replaying the moment he cut a feeder serving his mother's street. They carry the choices. They remember serial numbers and street corners, not headlines. Aftermath, recovery isn't restoration. Power returns before normal does. Cold load lingers, cruise stage restarts in loops. Hospitals reconcile fuel logs, water plants flush lines. Procurement hunts transformers, remanufacture lists outrun budgets. IT rebuilds historian servers. Operators retrain muscle memory around new HMI quirks. Mutual aid demobilizes. Locals absorb overtime and frayed nerves. Small businesses reopen with hand-lettered signs and half-stocked shelves. Some never unlock again. Insurers parse exclusions. Cities negotiate reimbursement while rating agencies circle. Oversight teams arrive with clipboards. Findings repeat old themes with new dates. Crews walk feeders on foot, mark hidden burns, and replace porcelain that cracked in silence. One operator finally sleeps, another stares at the ceiling. Restoration flips breakers. Recovery rebuilds trust, vendors, spares, training, maps, and habits. It moves in weeks and years, not hours. And in the middle of it, someone updates a phone tree, prints it, and tapes it to a control room wall. The playbook that would work if we did it. Start with steel and oil. We need a domestic transformer spine, not a shopping list in a global backlog. That means standardizing the big units instead of treating every substation like a bespoke suit. Pick a handful of interoperable designs, shared footprints, common bushing spacing, tap ranges that cover 90% of needs, and nameplate impedances that won't destabilize a replacement. Then build the factory capacity to turn those designs into inventory, not quotes. DOE and states co-fund with take or pay contracts, so lines keep running even when budgets wobble. The spares live in regional pools with pre-arranged indemnity, crane plans, and rail routes mapped. When one blows, you don't start reading, you start moving. Harden the yards that matter most. We already know the list: the substations whose failure reroutes half a state. Give them full treatment: ballistic walls around banks, opaque perimeters, fiber entries that come up inside the fence and split into truly diverse routes, dual station service with automatic transfer, and control houses that can run for days without outside air or a single HVAC unit. Inside those houses, segment at the bay level. A compromised relay or RTU can't see its neighbor. Vendor access expires by default, lights up only through jump hosts with recorded sessions, and dies if it goes quiet. These are not moonshots, they're checklists that get done once and verified often. Communications redundancy can't be a drawing flourish. Route A and Route B must be different trenches, different providers, different bridge crossings, and where possible, different utilities. Microwave backstops need weather-resilient paths, not single towers on ridgelines that ice together. Test failover monthly under load, not in a quiet window. When field crews cut a fiber by accident, it should be boring, not an exercise. Bring the reflexes into this century. Replace aging relays with a coordinated fleet, one vendor or tested mix, with settings managed centrally and version control that treats protection like code. Wrap that in wide area visibility, PMUs at key buses, analytics tuned for fast oscillations, and alarms that operators trust. Use those eyes to run remedial action schemes across regions that you've actually practiced. When a tie line trips, the scheme shouldn't live in a binder. It should live in code and muscle memory. By physics, synchronous condensers at strategic nodes add inertia and fault current without burning fuel. Pair them with grid-forming batteries and inverter-capable wind and solar that are contracted for headroom. Headroom isn't charity, it's a service. Markets should pay for it like they pay for capacity. Set clear requirements. A percentage of installed inverter capacity must be grid-forming by default, with droop and ride-through settings harmonized regionally. Vendors publish tested control profiles. Operators validate them in digital twins before they hit steel. Black Start gets a rewrite. Build multiple paths into major load pockets that don't share the same river, gas valve, or road. Batteries take the first steps. Form the bus, energize auxiliaries, start a small unit, then a bigger one. Pilots exist, turn them into programs. Every path needs drills, crews in trucks, radios on, checklists in hand, quarterly, not after the next press conference. Treat Black Start like an airline treats emergency procedures, practiced so often it's boring. Operators are the hinge. Create a national curriculum that crosses ISOs and utilities with shared simulators that replicate real networks, not generic grids. Send people on exchanges. A PJM operator spends a week in MISO. A Muni dispatcher sits in a CAISO control room during a heat wave. Build a credential that follows them with pay that keeps them. Tie career ladders to drills, not just years in a chair. When events hit, these relationships shorten phone calls and cut through permission loops. Fix the seams with real capacity, not slogans. Build new HVDC valves where the data says they matter. East-west bridges with gigawatt-class ratings, ERCOT converters that can swing fast during weather events, and interregional DC to bypass congested AC corridors. The permitting wall is real, so change the incentives. Let projects that meet reliability thresholds earn a federal backstop siting review after a defined state window, with compensation formulas that respect land and speed the process. Give FERC clear authority to score projects on national resilience value, not just local economics. And when new lines die in court, learn and refile within months, not years. Cyber maturity moves with real segmentation and simple rules that stick. Map every device to a zone. No flat networks, Every vendor session is time-bounded, multi-factor, and recorded. Firmware is signed and verified. Changes are staged and rolled back if they misbehave. Out-of-band sensors, phasers, traveling wave recorders, line monitors feed a separate analytics stack that can call out SCADA when the picture diverges. Build a habit. When the screens conflict with physics, physics wins until proven otherwise. Fuel and gas electric coordination need law, not luck. Codify critical load lists that include compressor stations and the electronics that keep valves and meters alive. Require pipeline operators to share live pressure and outage data with grid operators during declared events, with liability protections that encourage cooperation. Contract dual fuel where it makes sense, and test those tanks under cold conditions so you're not surprised by gelling when you need it most. Money matters. Tie allowed returns to resilience outcomes, restoration time targets, black start path diversity, comms route diversity, relay fleet modernization percentages. If a utility hits the marks, it earns. If it misses, it fixes before it files for the next set of shiny projects. Create a federal reinsurance pool for catastrophic grid losses so insurers don't flee the market after one multi-region hit. Use that pool to push best practices, lower premiums for hardened yards, segmented networks, and contracted grid forming headroom. None of this is exotic. It's shovels, switches, code, and rules we enforce against ourselves. The alternative is waiting for the next 3 a.m. phone call and hoping we can improvise a miracle with tired people and long lead times. We can choose a different habit, build spare capacity into steel and people before physics asks the question. We built a miracle on assumptions that no longer hold. Resilience isn't talk, it's steel, code, drills, and time bought in advance. If you want the next layer, the exact choke points that decide who gets power when it's scarce, watch the next episode. Subscribe for more untold infrastructure stories, the people inside them, and the choices that quietly set our odds.